Hey, Reverend JJ, back here at the Lotus Lounge. So, the energy is feeling really intense, and doing my best to stay grounded and optimistic. Feels like something's about to go down, but we shall see. Interesting times we are in right now. I wanted to kind of veer off a little bit and share some of the stories of past clients that I've worked with in my close to 20 years experience. And those of you in the field, or any other physician, or anybody that has a client caseload, it doesn't matter if it's even a lawyer, there are some clients that just kind of stand out. And I want to talk a little bit about some of those individuals that after 15 years, 20 years, they still stand out in my mind. And I can remember therapy sessions. So I just wanted to discuss some of the particular individuals that have made an impact for me, and just kind of share some of what that was like. So I figured I would start closer to the beginning, and that would be when I worked at the psychiatric hospital. And it was a community mental health hospital. So individuals that were there were brought there, oftentimes against their will. It was an involuntary placement. There were occasions of people that were there voluntary, but majority of them were there being held against their will because they were a danger to themselves or others. So I saw some crazy shit on that unit. And, I started out as a mental health tech, and that's the lowest, bottom of the totem pole when, we're talking about like mental health treatment, meaning like that's the beginning stages. You start there and then you can progressively move your way up if you so choose. So I started out there as a mental health tech with my psychology bachelor's degree. So I only had 4 years of a degree. And a couple of things and incidents that stand out. So I will never forget that I was attacked on the unit. And this woman was there and her husband was also there. They were both locked up there at the same time. I believe there were 4 units in this hospital that I worked in. So there was a geriatric unit, so where they had the elderly people and individuals that had private insurance. So it was a little more cushy. And then there was the substance abuse piece, where that's where the detox happened, 3 to 5 day detox. People were there that would be considered to be what's called a Marchman Act. So they were there against their will for 3 to 5 days to detox because of drugs, or substance issues, alcohol. And then there was a children's unit, which I worked there. And then there was another unit that was just a little bit more hardcore. And that's where the individuals that didn't have any insurance would go to, or typically people that were a high risk, or people that could potentially hurt or harm somebody in the other wing where the elderly were being held. So it's not like we were going to have a 20-year-old, schizophrenic over with possibly an elderly population or geriatric population that could be put in harm also. So I worked all these units, all of them. I took people's pulse. I did their blood pressure. My job was to walk around and do checks, either as a 5-minute check or a 10-minute check. Some people were on what's called a one-on-one, and you literally had to be by that person's side within arm's length, and that was a higher level. Then there might be people that are in the seclusion room, and they're in there with restraints. I put people in restraints before. I had to do takedowns. I was a part of those things. So if somebody was in a seclusion room, you had to stand by there and monitor and make sure, that everything was okay. Restraints can't be too, tight. Can't have any issues. They need to make sure that they're breathing. I still need to check their blood pressure, stuff like that. So a couple of people that stand out from that wonderful experience that I had early on in my life, okay? So this chick, her and her husband, they were both at the facility at the same time. And just to kind of paint the picture for you, there's a bunch of rooms around like a U. And then in the middle, there was the nursing station. And then there was like a little common area that had, 8, maybe 10 chairs tops. And there were these hard plastic chairs that were like filled with sand or just so uncomfortable. And then there was just like a random TV. And then there was cafeteria-like tables for where everybody would eat. So I'm standing in the common area, and this woman says, oh, God, what the hell did she say? She says, stop sleeping with my man. And she came up to me and grabbed me from behind and like choked on me, like did like a choke hold. And I had training, like I had specific training on how to deal with these certain situations. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to grab her arm, pull it down, and then kind of yank away, right? And then push away. That was the training. So I froze. So I thought that was kind of ironic that I had a trauma response. Now that I'm saying this out loud, I didn't realize it, but I froze. And then some of the other techs came to assist, and then she, got hauled into a seclusion room. But so I wasn't sleeping with her husband. I don't have any inclinations of doing anything of sorts. But so I was attacked on the unit. That one stands out for me quite a bit. There was this other guy that had come in a couple of times, and he was fucking hot. And me and this was when I was actually a social worker. So I was a tech, and then I moved up to being a social worker after being there for a little bit. I don't remember how long. I also worked as a case manager for the same job or the same company. And then I ended up leaving when I got my master's degree. So I was there for 5 years. So I progressively moved my way up. So there was this guy that came in, and he was smoking. And me and the other social workers, we would all talk about it. And none of us would do anything that was at all inappropriate. I was still a very ethical individual, and I wouldn't flirt, nothing like that, never. But this guy was fucking hot. And he was in jail, and his diagnosis was schizophrenia. And he thought people were poisoning him, and he lit his house on fire when his parents were inside of it. So yeah, he had problems, and he was out of touch with reality, but this guy was fucking smoking ass hot. And I'll also never forget, it just kind of it bothers me thinking about it, but there was a guy that I was working with, and you would be assigned your client based on a rotation. And so, we would it was just 3 of us that were there during the day. And there was 1 social worker that was there on the weekend. And so during the Monday through Friday, a little bit busier, psychiatrists were there and everything. And so there was this older gentleman, 40-something, and he was carrying a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, pretty much was homeless and really struggled with life and made a lot of really poor decisions. And I don't remember exactly like how he ended up on the unit, but he died in the hospital. And I remember I wasn't working, I think because I used to do the evening shift and it happened on the morning shift. I used to work like 3 to 11, and I did overnights as well. I mean, I did every shift, but on that day, I wasn't doing the checks. I wasn't monitoring and walking around doing the observation. But he had sleep apnea, and I don't believe he ever had a CPAP machine, which I thought was kind of strange now that I'm saying this out loud again. And this is 20 years ago, so he used to snore really loud. And one of the techs had checked on him, and then when they came back around 5 minutes later, he was dead. He wasn't making any noise. He wasn't snoring. It was right before they were getting ready to wake up in the morning is, I think, when they found him. And there's a whole big thing that happens when a patient dies, in a psychiatric hospital. And, it's called a sentient event. And there's all the stuff that has to happen with notation and documentation and monitoring and, checking, what was going on and medications and this and that. And I remember me and the director, the social worker that was my supervisor, we had to meet with his mom. And she was like 90-something. She was quite old, and she had obviously dealt with quite a bit with him. And that was just really sad, having to have that conversation and tell her this. And I do believe that they did an investigation questioning medical error. And I don't know what ever came out of it. It's really not privy to my knowledge, being a social worker, tech, whatever. But I think he was over-medicated. And he had this big beer belly, like a big old belly. And, people call that the silent killer. And he had sleep apnea, so physically, medically, already struggling, high blood pressure, all kinds of stuff that was going on with this guy. But he died. He died on the unit. He was my client. So I also had another client. She was murdered. And this was a crazy story. So she was schizophrenic. She was my client. I was case manager. So I would go to people's homes. I would help them get places if they needed to go somewhere. If they needed a ride to Social Security or to an appointment, or anything, grocery shopping, anything in the community. If they needed to go pay a bill, or go deal with like food stamps and their insurance, Medicaid, DCF, whatever. My job was to link people with resources in the community. That's what case management does. So I had this client. She was older, and she had schizophrenia, and she was very religiously preoccupied, is the phrasing that we would use, in meaning a lot of focus on religion and spirituality and God. And I say this, when we say a preoccupation, I'm not just like talking about, a person that has a belief. I'm talking about it's to an excess. and she hallucinated, and there was a lot of stuff happening. She was on medication. She was seeing a psychiatrist. And her son also had schizophrenia. And he had been released from jail, and he was living with her. And they had this, I would go to their house. I had to do home visits. I had to do monthly home visits with all my clients, at a minimum, monthly home visits. So I had been out to their apartment, and it was just like one big room. It was more like a hotel, like an efficiency. And so it was like one big room, and she slept in like the main area. And then there was like another little side room, very small. Like, honestly, I'm looking at my closet right now, and it was as big as my closet. So I wonder if that's what it was the purpose was for like a walk-in closet or something. I'm not sure. But so he too had schizophrenia, and he was released from jail. And one of the other case managers I also was working with, he was her client. So she and I would staff things, you know what I mean? And we would, talk about what was going on so we could best help them. So I remember it was right around St. Patrick's Day, and I was pregnant. I was pregnant with Zach. And so it was March. He was born in June. So I was pretty big. And I was, still working. And I worked all the way up until, I don't even remember. I don't really think I took much time off with Zach. Who knows, but whatever. So I was pregnant, and I was big. And I was with her in the car. And I remember her asking me if I was going to get my tubes tied. And I don't remember my response back to her, but regardless of the fact, it set her off, because then she started saying things about how that you don't have sex unless you're procreating, and how I was a sinner because I was getting my tubes tied, which I didn't get my tubes tied. I never did. So I don't think I gave her like a solid answer. I think it was more of like a kind of a wishy-washy type of response. And looking back at it now, especially with my continued experience, then I was still a newbie. I mean, it was like fresh out of college. I didn't even have my master's degree then. So like I understood psychology, but there's still some things, you can still also be a human and be reactive. And I'm also hormonal, and I'm pregnant, and like whatever. And I have her in the car with me. And so she got like really upset with me because of however I had responded. And that was my last interaction with her. That was a Wednesday. Like, I even remember it was a fucking Wednesday. And I was bringing her to Social Security. So I still brought her to the Social Security, even though she was, kind of freaking out in my car. But we were able to manage what we needed to do. And I brought her back home, and I dropped her back off. And I didn't see her again after that. So Friday, she was supposed to go to see the nurse practitioner, and she didn't show up. And I called her. It's my fucking job. She didn't answer. So I talked to the nurse practitioner, and I said, it's really unusual for her. She had always been consistent with her appointments. She didn't miss appointments. Like, even if she didn't want to take the medication, she would still go to her appointment. And so I talked to the nurse practitioner. I think I probably staffed it with my supervisor. Who knows? And I said, I'm going to do a wellness check. And I called the sheriff department, and I had them go out to her apartment. And they called me back later, and they said nobody answered, and they didn't have a reason to enter, so they had to leave. And I was like, okay. I'm like, I did my part. Like, there's nothing else more that I can do when you send the fucking cops out there to go follow up with your client, and they tell you, well, well, we knocked on the door and nobody answered and we don't have a reason to enter. So, and I understand. Again, people have, we used to have rights. People have rights. You can't just enter someone's home unless you have a fucking warrant. That's the way it's supposed to be. So they never entered. So Monday morning, before I am on my way to the office, I got a call from my supervisor and she told me that she was dead. And again, sentient event. I had to get with the other case manager that was working with the son. And her and I had to make sure that all of our notes made sense because I had to document everything that I had attempted to do last week. And then she had to make her documentations as well. And so, it's just like, it's so, I don't know, it's just an icky kind of feeling, and you're still like dealing with losing your client and there's a death. So what happened was she was off her medicine and she was schizophrenic and she's hallucinating and she's all about Jesus and God and angels. And her son, who was schizophrenic, he was on the flip side of the darkness, more evil, satanic, demonic, also religiously preoccupied, but in a different form. And he killed her. He bought a baseball bat days before, so it was considered a premeditated murder. And he beat her to death with a baseball bat because he was psychotic and fucking crazy. And she stayed there for days because her body had been decomposed. She was wearing a nightgown and her body was decomposing in her bed. And he beat her with a baseball bat. So they found him walking around on the beach, all disoriented, and they picked him up. And he ended up going to what's called it's a state hospital for the criminally insane. He had to go there so he could be stabilized, so that way he could have a trial and, be charged. But because he was psychotic and not in touch with reality, he had to go there first. I believe he was there for several years. And then he did end up, I think he ended up finally having to go to actual prison. But it was a really fucked up situation there. So the day in the life of a therapist and social worker, case manager, mental health worker. There's shit too that we have, that we go through along with them. And I just kind of wanted to share some of this so people can understand a little bit about what it's like doing this type of work, because it's not easy. It takes a special person to want to be of service, and it's undervalued a lot. So that was my experience with the community mental health center that I worked for about 5 years. And after, oh my God, I just remembered this. I totally forgot about this. But while I was pregnant, also, I remember I was 8 months pregnant, and I had gone to another client. She was also schizophrenic. and she was paranoid, and she accused me of stealing stuff out of her apartment, which I did not do. I would never do anything like that. That's the whole thing. Like, I wouldn't take her jewelry or anything. That's not anything. Like, if anybody is doing that in this field, I'm utterly repulsed. So, I got accused, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it's an undervalued type of job. Like, sometimes these people are not in tune to the real world and what's happening. So she was a big woman too. And she came at me, and I was 8 months pregnant. And I don't remember if she had a knife or not. Something's telling me that she did, but I'm just kind of blanking out for a moment. But I just remember her coming at me, and I left. I was like, I'm out of here. And I told my supervisor about it, and she didn't even seem to care. And I said to her, I don't really feel safe going out there right now, being pregnant. And I really had to advocate for myself. And it basically came down to, they didn't want to pay another case manager to go with me because we needed to be reimbursed in some form. So I think I did have one case manager came out with me to the house, and then I'm pretty positive after I had Zach, I don't think I ever went back to that job. I think I don't really remember all the ins and outs of it, but I don't think I went back there. And I really didn't like working for that supervisor because I didn't feel like she was taking into consideration the safety of their employees. And, I know we work with crazy people. I know they're mentally ill individuals. I get that. But I sure in hell wasn't going to put myself and my baby in jeopardy for a job that they would replace me for if anything ever happened to me. Like, yeah, I don't think they really cared very much. So I really don't think I went back there. I think I actually did go back to the psychiatric facility and went back to working there as a social worker. I think I'm almost positive that's what I did. And I stayed there for 5 years. And after that, I moved on, and I was working in a residential facility for adolescent boys, ages 13 to 17, that had histories of abuse, neglect, exploitation. They were in the foster care system, and they were placed there. So the facility, I was the lead therapist, so I oversaw as the clinician the residential facility. I made sure that the staff was handling the kids properly. I did different trainings and education for the staff and for the kids that were there. And I did one-on-one sessions with them, and I would do a group therapy. And there are 3 kids that stand out to me the most, and I'm going to talk about them. But just to kind of set the stage, this is like a place where kids go when foster homes and group homes are not available. It was called a BHOS, Behavioral Health Overlay Service. It's it's like a leveled program to an extent. It's where, kids that really don't know how to function properly in society get kind of stuck there. And it was a beautiful home. I mean, it was an absolutely gorgeous house. Like, if I could live there, and the neighborhood was so nice. It was on 5 acres of land. I mean, they had a basketball court. It was not a bad place. But I mean, I had staff there that would flirt with me. Just so inappropriate. And it was really sexual harassment, but I was young, and I didn't really stand up for myself. But, so these individuals, these kids that were there, they had all kinds of problems, right? They were involved in DJJ, so they were involved in the juvenile justice system. They were getting suspended from school, expelled from school, getting into fights, damaging property, breaking windows, running away, doing drugs, getting into fights, getting Baker acted. I mean, it was just so much happening for these guys. And it's just really sad because they just really wanted to probably be taken care of like kids are supposed to be taken care of. And they were stuck in the system. So, some of the people that were there came from a program. So they were coming from a higher level program, and it was like a step down. They were in locked facilities, and usually at those programs for 9 months to 18 months on average, give or take, sometimes even longer, sometimes 3 years. But typically average 9 months to 18 months. They were at these other locked facility programs. And one of the kids that I was working with, he had come from there, and it was a sex offender program. And sadly, while he was at the program, somebody perpetrated on him. Somebody molested and raped him while he was at that program, at the sex offender program. And he ended up turning around and he perpetrated on somebody else while he was at that program. And there was a lot of work that I did with that kid to help him. And I have no idea where he is by now, but like listening to those things and having to, have these teenage boys, talk with me about, these sexual, in these sexual things and these perversions, and the shame and the guilt and everything that comes along with it. And it's a lot. So I had another he was the youngest one there. And I remember him, I remember reading I had their history. So like I would have reports from DCF, so I would be able to see some of the things that were, alleged. And when he was really little, we're talking 5, 6, his mom used to force him to give her oral sex. And he would have to watch her having sex with other men. And just so messed up. Even like saying it out loud right now, just kind of like talking about it, it definitely is emotional. And it's just a lot to take in. And these poor kids, they were abused and they didn't know any other way. So the third kid, he made such an impression. He was involved in a gang. And, if anybody knows anything about gangs, people tend to seek them out, as a form of a family because they don't have a family. So it becomes their family. And he was involved in a gang and he had DJJ issues. And I think at that time he was right about like 16 when he had come to this facility, and he was smoking pot and not making good decisions and choices. But I'll never forget, he sat in my office for the first time and he just spewed out all of the sexual abuse that had happened to him starting at the age of 5. And he was right about 15, 16. And he sat in my office for an hour and a half. I didn't say a fucking word. I didn't say anything. I just sat there and I listened. And I let him tell his story. These horrible, abusive events that happened to him. He told me about things that happened while he was in church. Like an uncle would molest him during church service. He said he would put like a coat over his lap so nobody would know what was going on. And it was happening in plain fucking sight in the church. So most of them were family members, uncles, cousins. I remember mostly men. And I just sat there and let him get all this out for an hour and a half. And I remember he said to me too, he said, "You're the only one that says my name the right way." I was the only one that pronounced his name properly. And I'm not going to divulge that or anything. And by now, if he's still alive, which I have no idea. I don't know his last name or anything. I only know a first name. And I never looked him up, so, I mean, whatever. But, I mean, that was 20 years ago. Or 15 years ago when I worked there. And he was 15, 16, so he's what, 30 now? Yeah, if he's still alive? And I remember that was at the end of my day. He was my last session. And I didn't stay there. I worked there. I usually would stay till about 7:30. I would have dinner with them. We'd all sit at the table and everything, and we'd have dinner. I would try to make it somewhat family oriented. And, I wanted to make it like a home for them. But they didn't know how to do that. They didn't know how to have a home because nobody ever taught them. But he was my last session for the day. And I drove home. And I cried. And I cried for his suffering. And the pain that he experienced. And it's just so sad that people have to go through things like that. I've got my stuff. I shared it on here. I've got so many things that I haven't even talked about. It's just ridiculous. But I'll never forget him. Ever. So you got certain clients that stand out. And I hope I helped him. I hoped I helped him get some of that stuff out so he didn't have to be tormented with it. But I'm human too, And that affected me. So much now that I'm actually tearful and crying about it. But I'm a week away from my period, so whatever. This is just stupidness happening with emotions, and it's cancer season, so whatever. Here we are, feels, are all in the feels. But that wasn't easy dealing with that one. I had a lot of stuff people have told me about horrible things. So I just had this other client. I don't know, it's a couple other clients, that still kind of stand out. But so I got laid off from that place. I assisted that facility in a way that they obtained a specialized accreditation. And you had to meet certain requirements to be able to have that accreditation. And there was an audit that had to happen. And I remember the auditor that had come out, she reviewed the records, and they have to go through my notes and everything and review notes. And I remember she asked me, she said, "Are you licensed?" And I said, no, not yet. And she's like, "Well, you should be. Your notes are excellent." I was like, "Oh, thank you." So my training from being a social worker and being on the unit, and I'll never forget the director, supervisor that I had there. But she taught me, proper documentation. So I do that pretty well. But it was just kind of nice to get the kudos. But because of my quality work at that facility, I got them a specialized accreditation. The director and I worked together to be able to make sure that the facility was up to par, and they received it. And then, like, I don't know, 6 months later, I got laid off. They let me go because of budgeting. And the company I was working with filed a Chapter 11. They filed for bankruptcy. So they let me go. So, I mean, no, nothing. I didn't do anything wrong. It was budgeting. And whatever. Who knows? Maybe I did do something wrong and that was their way of letting me go. I have no idea. Who knows? I don't think I did anything wrong, though. But, I don't know. So I ended up leaving there, and then I went and I was doing community mental health, and that's where I was, going to people's homes and, working with different clientele, and I was working with kids. So community mental health, you go to do home visits, and you can also see the kids at school. And so I did that for years, 10 years. And so I had these two brothers. So I'm going to talk about the brothers and the sisters. So I had these two brothers. They were so lost and misguided. They lived with their grandma. Their dad was incarcerated. Their mom was incarcerated, actually. And she also, so they were both incarcerated. And she obtained additional charges while she was in jail because she was getting into fights. She was likely bipolar, whatever. I never met her, so I'm just speculating more than anything. But I worked with the kids, and I saw what was going on with them, and there was lots of stuff happening there. But I did so much to try to assist in helping them stay out of trouble and not fucking keep getting arrested and getting suspended and having all these issues at school and failing and whatever. But, in therapy, you're planting seeds, and sometimes the seeds take longer to grow. But I remember they would steal bikes all the time. Like, they're constantly stealing bikes. And they just had no regard for authority. And, I'm this white chick coming out there and, trying to help this family change the generational issues that have been probably ongoing, for who knows how long. But so those two boys stand out to me. And then I had these other two young ladies that I worked with, and their dad was stabbed. And they lived in a not so good area. And I remember the girls talking with me about how the cops didn't respond quick enough. And this is a neighborhood where there was crime, a lot of crime and in drugs. And the cops didn't always get where they needed to get to in time. And I worked with these girls for a while, a couple years maybe, processing the trauma. One of them saw the dad with his intestines hanging out, and just really traumatic for them to witness. And, we would talk about grief, and they felt like, he was around, and there would be noises in the house, and, they would think that was him. And it's possible. But my heart went out to them. I just wanted them to not feel the pain. And if I could take away the sorrow and the pain of people, one, I wouldn't have a job anymore, but whatever, what does that matter at this point? Because then there's no suffering. But my heart went out to them. Like, I remember their names and everything, and they're very unique names. And so was the other gentleman that said, "You're the only one that pronounces my name properly." They were very unique and different names. And I remember them. And I remember the girls. And I wonder now, like, how they are and where they are and how they turned out. And I wonder if I made a difference, or if I impacted their lives for the better. And their poor mom, she had another little baby. I believe it was his also. I don't remember the dynamic. I don't think the mother and the father were together when he was killed. But so she was a single mom, and she was hustling to try to take care of those kids. And she, too, was stressed out and traumatized. And I remember them saying that they called the police, and it took just forever. I mean, we're talking I don't know. I don't want to speculate because I don't remember exactly, but 15, 20 minutes for them to show up. So when you call 911, usually they're supposed to be there hopefully within minutes, right? They send the closest officer or whatever. And I'm pretty positive that was what I remember. 15, 20 minutes it took them to get out there. He didn't make it. He bled out. In the road with these little girls crying and screaming about their dad. So I was thinking about this last night, and I just wanted to paint the picture of what this looks like for clinicians and mental health workers, and some of the things that we have to encounter. And I really do pray that I did something to point them in the right direction. And I hope that they were guided. I hope they all are successful and made something of themselves. And I wonder. And that's one of the things that sucks about being a therapist also, You leave an agency and you can't have contact with your clients when you leave, or they get discharged and you can't really have continued, relations. So I figured I'd touch on this last one that stands out for me. I don't remember the name or anything, but I remember the situation. And then I'll probably wrap this episode up of Day in the Life of a Therapist. That's probably what I'm going to title this. But I had this family that I was working with, and a young girl, and she was getting into all kinds of trouble, getting suspended, getting into fights. She was involved with DJJ. She got arrested. Mom, single mom, had a lot of her own issues. She had an eating disorder, legitimately. She had an eating disorder. She had anxiety. She had depression. She had trauma. She was abused physically, lots of bad relationships, almost killed. One of the, and the kids witnessed this. The young lady that I was working with, she witnessed her mom being beaten, and she had to go to the hospital. And I think she had a broken, not jaw, what is it, under your eye, whatever that bone is under your eye. But, and I think he tried to drown her and choke her. And most of the work had to be with the parent, because the parent was the one that was really, not able to meet the needs of their daughter, because she too had her own stuff going on. And this is why, we talk a lot about, resolving your traumas before you have kids so you don't traumatize your kids. But that's not realistic. I have my own trauma, and I may have caused inadvertently some traumas to my children. I didn't choose good men in my life, and their dad wasn't anything that spectacular. And I know my son, my oldest son, he remembers his dad kicking the shit out of him, literally kicking the shit out of him with steel-toed boots. And I know he remembers that. They didn't go back to see him after that. I just didn't permit them to be around him. So parents have trauma too, right? So I'll never forget. That's the whole thing. I wanted to kind of talk about these ones that stand out, because these are incidents that they're just ingrained in my brain. You know, I talk about how I don't remember movies, and I can literally watch a movie and, you know, be halfway through it and be like, oh, I've already seen this movie, duh. Like, my brain doesn't remember stuff like that for some reason. It's just the way it's designed. And memory recall, this or that, who knows? Maybe it has something to do with my past trauma, with my head trauma when I was 2. I don't fucking know. But I remember these clients. And this girl had shared with me, okay, so the mom had a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend, and he wasn't supposed to be coming around. Well, she was allowing him to come around. So she was breaking the injunction, and it was putting the kid in harm's way. And the cops would go out there to the apartment, and the guy would always be gone. So there wasn't a way to hold anybody accountable because they were manipulating the system. But the client, the little girl, she told me that he's here. He's coming over. She was scared. She didn't want to be around him. And he threw like a sack of flour, like those big 5-pound sacks of flour, and like knocked her in the head and pushed her around and dragged her around. And she told me this whole big story. And I'm like, this isn't acceptable. So I took the mom outside. I said, I'm going to call DCF if you're not going to call DCF. And my exact words were to her, if you're not going to protect your daughter, I will. And that's how intense and passionate I am about helping and saving people. I mean, I know we have to save ourselves, and I know I'm getting loud. But that's how passionate I am about this job and about what I do. And this is my fucking purpose, to be here on this planet. To be a protector and a guide and a teacher and a model of, you know, appropriate behavior. Modeling being a good mom. Modeling being healthy. Being a role model for somebody that can overcome trauma and abuse, and now be here to assist in others to be able to process and work through theirs. So this client stands out to me because this is the last client that I had seen. So I ended up calling DCF, okay, and I don't even remember, but I mean, the kids didn't get taken away. It was just a means of having I guess another established service to help the mom. She needed to be on medication herself. She needed her own counseling. You know, she needed some work with domestic violence. You know, she keeps bringing back this guy that she has an injunction against. So, I mean, so all these interventions, people are trying to step in and try to help. And then, you know, they're kind of doing their own thing and going against that. And I did call DCF, so the kids did not get taken away; they were not removed, but services were put into place to help. And oftentimes when we call DCF, parents don't want to work with us anymore. And I'm a mandated reporter, and I didn't. When in doubt, you call it in, and that's my training, and that's how I was trained. And I'm not here to determine whether or not there was abuse going on. I'm not the investigator. My job is to report speculated abuse. The key term is speculated. I don't have to have confirmation of abuse. I have to just think that somebody's being abused, and I have to report that. That's the law. I can lose my license if I don't. If I know that somebody's being hurt in a home and I don't call that in and report that, I'm held liable. Then I get in trouble. So there's a major responsibility here. So I did call, I did report it, and they still continued to work with me after that happened. And when Captain Mike died, they were my last appointment for the day. And I had gotten the call while I was on my way, and I remember my girlfriend being like, "Where are you?" I'm like, "I'm working. What's going on?" And she's like, "Captain Mike died." I'm like, "No, he didn't. I just talked to him last night. What are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah." And she's like, "You need to get home right now." She's like, "I need you to come home." And I'm like, "Okay." So I just kind of I was in shock. And I went to this family that I was working with. I went to their home, and I was all shooken. in a panicked mode, and I didn't really know what was happening. And I told them, I said, I gotta go. I'm sorry. I have to reschedule our appointment. I said, somebody that I know passed away, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I really bonded with this family, even after calling TCF on them and saying to the mom in a not so very nice way, like, you're not taking good care of your daughter. And my words, if you're not going to protect your daughter, I will. That's what I told her. And I did. But they were my last family when I had learned about what had happened with Captain Mike. And I ended up coming across this girl later on. I had another job, and she ended up in the DJJ facility that I was working at. And so ironically, our paths ended up crossing again. But so those are some memorable experiences of some of the clients that I've worked with. And I thought I'd share that. So this is Raw with Reverend JJ. Day in the life of a mental health counselor. Namaste.